On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I'd like to welcome you all to our candidate forum tonight. I'm Stephanie Ennis, the Voter Service Chair of the local League of Women Voters. And thank you to our council candidates, Greg and Don and John, for being present and participating in our forum tonight. We have a wonderful forum moderator here, Eileen Mosler of Cannon Falls. So there are cards up here and pencils if you didn't grab one on the way in. Myself and a couple other volunteers will be passing them out and collecting them throughout the forum. You can ask the candidates questions. And the candidates will also have a couple minutes in the beginning to introduce themselves and then at the end make some closing statements. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Eileen.
Thank you, Stephanie. I'd like to thank everyone for showing up tonight. We have our candidates, Greg Colby, Don McGee, and John Dennison. And I'd also like to thank the audience for being here, because without you, we couldn't proceed with this. Our mission is to make democracy work for all, and candidate forums are one of the ways that we do this, and I'm glad to be here for this one. The League as an organization does not endorse any candidate or political party, although individuals may. We're going to begin with a 2-minute introduction from each candidate and then turn to questions from the audience. And each candidate will have 1 minute to answer. And I know that for some questions, it's going to seem like a really short period of time. For others, it's going to seem really long. So we will stick to the 1 minute or less time frame. We do have a timer. Sophie Rogers, a student at Carleton College, will be our official timer and keep us on track. And what we'd like the audience to do is to write your questions legibly, please, on the cards that are available to you. And then either Stephanie or Corinne will be picking them up and bringing them to a table. We're going to ask that you keep your questions concise and related to issues that are important to the community and that are under the purview of the Northfield City Council. Our reviewers, Kathleen Doran Norton and Stephanie, will review the audience questions for clarity, redundancy, and then sometimes we have questions that are very similar. So they may be combining those into one. So if you don't hear your specific question worded just as you had presented it, it may be because someone needed to change it to make it more clear and more concise. And we're going to start with several questions that were prepared in advance, or at least one, giving time for the audience to write and the screeners to review. And then we'll ask you to respond in kind of a random order, so I won't always be calling on you in the same sequence. And the audience is reminded to not respond to candidate answers, saving time for questions and maintaining a respectful atmosphere. And note that each candidate will conclude with a 1-minute comment at the end. So with that, we will proceed with the introductions, and we'll have Greg go first.
Okay. My name is Greg Colby. I'm currently sitting on the City Council. I want to thank the League of Minnesota Voters for setting this forum up. This is a good idea. Having served on the council for the last year, I think one of our best achievements is our ability to get along better. If you remember a year ago, that was a real question about whether the City Council could do that. I don't deserve credit for that entirely. The other new member on the City Council, Brad Ness, certainly deserves credit for that. And I think everybody has been respectful. It has worked well. As a result, we've been able to accomplish a number of things. We passed a resolution supporting the city becoming a Solar Garden subscriber. We will get them. The city has significant energy needs, but city government does too. And city government will now get most of its energy from solar after that solar garden is established. We are funding a new bookmobile. We have adopted a fire station renovation. We've adopted a public art policy. We approved a refuse license for curbside compost. We adopted an ordinance establishing the Mayor's Youth Council. We have done a lot of good things. Those are the highlights. In addition, we've increased the amount of road maintenance that we are doing this year and trying to catch up from when we weren't doing so much. But there is significantly more to do. We need to pursue economic development. We've got to do better with establishing and keeping affordable housing. We've got to do better with our infrastructure, with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We need to be more effective operationally with the city. We do all those things, and I think we're going to do quite well. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We'll go on to John.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, John.
John. Okay.
John.
Sorry, John.
I'm John Dennison. I was born and raised in Northfield. Went to college in South Florida. I'm a newlywed, recently married to an Oli. She's an RN. I work in healthcare at one of the local care centers. Been doing that for 6 years. I really enjoy it. I've always lived near my employer, which enables me to walk to work. I'm an avid walker. Many people have probably seen me around town. I'm one of Northfield's characters that people recognize but probably don't know much about. I'm a West Sider. I've always lived on the west side of town. I understand the difficulties and challenges of traversing the railroad tracks and the highway to get to the amenities of downtown. I was brought up in the Northfield School District. Very intimately familiar with that. So there you have it.
Thank you, John. Don?
Hi, I'm Don McGee. My wife and I have lived in Northfield for 55 years. Our 4 children graduated from Northfield High School. My background is engineering. I came to town to work at Sheldall as a project engineer, worked as engineering and marketing in several companies, had my own company for a while. And why am I here? Anybody that knows me at all, and maybe that's nobody, I spent the last 11 years sitting out in those chairs out there. I came to a few meetings on a special issue in 2006 and was intrigued with the way the council operated and didn't operate. And my main concern was I'd sit there and say, well, why isn't anybody asking the questions? Why aren't questions being asked? Why isn't this being considered? Why isn't that? And I would get 2 minutes. And that's not very much time to talk over there. Now if I know it's 1 minute, but we'll live with it. But at 2 minutes, so when this term became available, it struck me this may be a chance to get to ask questions that last longer than 2 minutes and maybe repeated and maybe get some answers. And what kind of answers would I be looking for? The council's main tasks are budget and policy. And on budget, there's a big hole. I don't know if it bothers you, but it bothers me. Section 9.1 of the charter says the council shall have full authority over financial affairs of the city. Yet the city council does not get a monthly statement. You get bank statements, companies get due financial. There's no monthly financial statement, so the council doesn't know what's going on. I am also concerned that the boards and commissions are not being used and involved in the process as they should. I think the policies that govern those organizations subject them more to being ignored or sometimes even chastised for the things they do. Hope we talk to this later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have some questions ready to go? Okay, well, I'll start with one. what I'd like to know is what you see as the most immediate priority in the city of Northfield for the city council to address at this point. And I'll start with John.
I see two issues that are intricately interwoven. The first is economic development, and I've been extremely disappointed in Northfield and particularly the city council to see most, if not all, of the economic development in the area happening in our neighbor to the south, Dundas. Anyone that goes there, it's very open. You can see what's physically happening in that area. But I'm also concerned about affordable housing. The actions of the current city council and the desire of them to raise the property tax levy 8.5% on top of a school board referendum is really going to make affordable housing a huge challenge in the city of Northfield, especially if there's a lack of economic development happening and no jobs that pay reasonable wages for someone to live here.
Okay, thank you. Don?
My main priority revolves around something that has not been discussed at all, as far as I know, in this chamber, and that is that Northfield has stopped growing. In the decades after the Second World War, Northfield has grown at 17 to 18% per decade. Since 2010, Northfield has grown only 2 to 5%, depending on whose numbers you use. So we've stopped growing. So this then addresses the issues John raises, is what happens to economic development if we're not growing? What happens to housing? What happens to all the other issues in town if we are stagnating, and a city that isn't growing is probably dying?
Okay, thank you. Greg?
I think the immediate priority is to implement the strategic plan that the City Council just recently adopted. I think it's a good plan. I think it'll work well. As to the claims that we're stagnating, I would point out that we have an 80-room hotel that is under construction at the crossings. We have 2 new brew pubs that have opened. We have a new restaurant that has opened, and there's a movie that's being filmed on Division Street. It's the 3rd one in 2 years. In addition, Kiplinger Magazine named Northfield in its one of the 10 great places to retire in its August 2017 issue. We're doing something right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Question 2. In a community that takes pride in honoring diversity, how would you help enable providing more housing options for seniors on fixed incomes and entry-level housing for young families and entry-level working people? And we'll start with Don.
Okay, this is a tough one. If we aren't growing, do we build houses for people to move in? Do we build houses for people here? The issue that brought me to this chamber 11 years ago is part of the issue. You know, do we have fewer houses, or are they being used differently? We have a lot of houses that have been turned into student housing. We've seen blocks up between 2nd and 1st Street next to Carlton with housing has been destroyed in order for other development. You know, I know there's a current effort to do some affordable housing, and that's excellent. But if you look at the number of people that can be housed in those facilities, it's a small part of the people that we need to house in this town. And I don't think as a city can be the full instigator of this. We have to figure out, why aren't contractors building a larger number of houses? What is wrong with our system right now?
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Well, the question, addresses several different things, seniors as well as young adults. And Don makes a good point about why isn't housing being provided at a more affordable rate? I've done some work with Habitat for Humanity, and a house can't be built for much less than, well, at least the plans that they're building anyway, can't be built for much under $100,000. And that is a problem. But I don't know how the city, with its limited resources, can really tackle that problem, we would need state assistance on that. And that's why voting for the legislature is so important. But what can the city do? I think, well, first of all, we have to develop a senior housing plan. We have to develop the Southbridge property. We have to preserve Kester Court. And that's all the time I've got. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John?
Interestingly, I work in an industry that impacts on both sides. The employees, most of the employees I work with can't live in Northfield. And there are limited options for lifelong living in this town. We have plenty of good senior living facilities, and I think we've got those bases covered. The city has done really well in that respect. But it's that entry-level housing, the support services for those citizens that is a real challenge. I don't know what the city, with its finite resources, can do to directly impact it, but it is something that needs to be addressed by the council, and I think they should take advantage of the hospital and the available land out there, and the healthcare industry, and ask the hospital consult with the hospital on what might be done by the city to encourage on both ends of that problem.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on with another question. This is a little bit different. Should Northfield establish a minimum wage such as Minneapolis has proposed or has proposed to do? And we'll start with Greg.
Yeah, well, complicated again. Minimum wage is ridiculously low. For the last 4 years we've had an economic recovery and wages have not followed course. And yet there are discussions about a huge tax cut for the benefit of the wealthy. I don't get that. I don't know how the city has authority to raise the minimum wage. If it did, I would have to be persuaded that it is in the city's best interest. I have heard those discussions, but at this point, I haven't got enough data to make a decision on that. I am particularly concerned about the fact that if you raise minimum wages, is that going to have an adverse impact on those who are employed at that level? And will they lose their jobs? I don't know.
Okay, thank you. Don?
I think to ask people to live on less than $15 an hour for a full-time job is almost criminal. People should get a good living wage. Having said that, I am sure Northfield as a city cannot do that. Northfield as a city and as a community can encourage our employers to strive to give a living wage to everybody. Now, unfortunately, John has mentioned the industry he works in, the senior care. Many of the workers in that industry do not get $15 an hour, and that is a real issue. We have, a problem in town. The city has said, for economic development, let's develop the tourist industry. Well, the tourists, we have restaurants and service industry. Most of those people are not making that much money in that industry. So we, in a way, are enabling these lower wage jobs, and we should figure out a way to stop it.
Okay, thank you. John?
I've been a strong advocate for raising the minimum wage to 15 now. I'm not sure the city has the authority to do it. It's a question that needs to be settled by the courts. I do think Northfield could take a stand. Northfield's good at taking stances that are moral imperatives. Make some kind of statement about it. Most employers in town are recognizing that 15 isn't cutting it. They're not getting employees. I was just given a big raise because I can't keep people to work the support jobs that are needed for certain industries in town. And the market is catching up, But I think it is a moral imperative, and like Mr. McGee said, it's criminal to expect people to live on less than 15. I may not have children, but I always advocate for the single mothers, especially that I work with, that can't make it on what they're making.
Okay, thank you. Question 4. Do you support a Northfield municipal ID? And we will start with Don.
Yes, absolutely. I have expressed serious reservations to the people promoting that and organizing with it, and I have talked to them. And my reservations are that this can backfire. I think we're seeing it potentially, at least with the DACA, the Dreamers, that were encouraged to register with the idea that they would be protected and could stay. And now all of the records they promote to the government, it's sad to say, I'm going to say, can be used against them to identify them and get them deported. And I have the same fear with the ID. If there is a register any place that registers who is here and getting these IDs, that it's like a shopping list for someone that wants to score a big hit and deport a bunch of people. So my suggestion of them is make sure that it's done in a way that there are not records that can be used against the people getting the IDs.
Okay, thank you. John?
I like the idea, but I'm always concerned about, like Mr. McGee brought up again, get the wrong person in power and this can backfire in a bad way. I would be more in favor of municipal IDs if the state would recognize it, if there was some kind of benefit, but just by issuing it, it's almost a business by business idea on whether or not they consider that good enough. I think it's one of those Northfield that I mentioned earlier, Northfield feel-good measures that Northfield is so good at passing, that I'm just really concerned about ways it can be misused and used as a list to essentially round people up. So I'm not in favor of, I see too many bad things that can come with this that, in my mind, outweigh the good.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Thank you. Neighbors United has been working on this problem since February of this year. This has been brought to the City Council in a work session and at a council meeting. There is lots of community support for it. The CAC, Laura Baker Services, the Isaiah Organization, Cannon Valley Friends, St. Dominic's Church, as well as, interestingly enough, the Minnesota Board of Pharmacy. The benefits are to the elderly, disabled, international students, and long-term visitors, as well as immigrants and maybe illegal immigrants. But it's helpful for opening a bank account, getting prescriptions, obtaining legal documents such as a birth certificate. I support it for all those reasons, but I support it because Roselle, New Jersey has done it for a number of years. But it began in San Francisco where it was adopted in 2007. No major problems that I can find on the internet at all. So yes, I support municipal IDs.
Okay, thank you. Let's turn to downtown a bit. What can and should the city do to support downtown and local businesses? And we'll start with John.
First off, it constantly gets brought up about the lack of parking, and then the council comes up with this idea to put bump outs on the curbs and redesign Division Street and take away 30 spaces. I've talked to some businesses downtown, and the city may have held some public input sessions, but from what I can tell, they never really went to the big stakeholders. There's really some griping about this particular project to redesign Division Street. I'm also not in favor of a big market fair downtown. The idea is to bring tourists to town and hopefully they'll shop locally. But what it does is it takes up a lot of parking, and the downtown businesses essentially see their weekend business going to people that aren't paying property taxes and setting up a temporary kiosk in a public park. So I've got concerns about that.
Okay, thank you, John. Greg?
Thank you. John makes a good point about the problem about parking, but I want you to think about that issue just for a second. If you're standing on water and you're looking east on 7th, taking 30 spaces from there would be a bad thing. Couldn't agree with you more. And it's only 2 blocks. They're long blocks. But when you stand on Woodley and you look down at 2nd, you're talking about more than a quarter mile. That's a long way, and losing 30 spaces in that area is not that great an impact. The other problem we have is Imminent Brewing across from Econo Foods has lots of pedestrian traffic walking up to it. We have to slow traffic down. We make the city more friendly to bicyclists as well, which is a tourist draw. So the way to help downtown is to work with NDDC, the Downtown Development Corps, to continue to promote pedestrian and bicycle friendliness. I'm out of time, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Don?
Okay, I'm going to confess here. All my life, I've been the optimist in the room as I've been an engineer. In solving the problems, I'm always the one that said we can solve it. Somebody in this game has to be the pessimist. The council was asking, working on their strategic plan, what do you think Northfield would look like in 20 years if you came back? And it was always going to be glowing, it's going to be fine. I think it's possible it's going to be gone. I think the downtown, our vital downtown, is on the edge of catastrophe. If you look at the businesses down there, nobody is getting rich. The business owners are not making enough money to maintain the buildings in a proper manner. We have now threats of major tax increases, which reflects right back on the tenants in those buildings. I think there has to be a major effort. Mr. Colby mentioned the NDDC. I think the NDDC, the chamber, the council has to put together an action group that looks seriously at what do we do to preserve our downtown.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to do is ask you to comment on the fiscal policies of the city. Do you perceive these as a reckless or good business practice? And Greg, we'll start with you.
Well, the question is so general, I'm struggling a bit, but let's try this. We've just had an annual fiscal review. We had accountants come in and look us over, and we are in good shape. Do we need to expand our tax base? We do. Spending is always challenged, but as was mentioned a minute ago, I can't remember by who, about real estate taxes increasing dramatically. The city's increase at most would be 8.5%. The city of Faribault has asked for, I think, roughly 5.5%. If the school district bond passes, it's going to be a lot more than 8.5%. So I don't see evidence that our fiscal policy is bad.
Okay, thank you. John?
I don't think the city's fiscal policy is necessarily bad. As a member of the council, we when I was on the council, I don't remember asking for a property tax increase of 8.5%. We worked within our budget. I think we were coming into, when I came on the council, we were coming into a time of spending freezing. Not a lot of things. The roads were in really bad shape. We expedited road reconstructions and reclamations. I don't think the city is necessarily doing a bad job. It's the council I have issues with. They come up with these ideas, and I saw a counselor at the last meeting say, I don't care what it costs, just make it happen. I think the council is filled with eco-warriors that are determined to save the planet, and they don't care what it costs and whose backs they're going to put the burden on to make it happen, as long as we're saving the planet and making everybody walk.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Don.
Yes, I did.
I knew I was
Thank
going to
you.
do this at some point.
Yeah,
so
okay.
I apologize. Thank
No.
you.
Okay, I did mention in my introduction that I am very concerned about the financial situation in the city, and one area is in the budgeting. We seem to consistently, now we're basing this on the records we do get, and if I misread the records, I'm not going to take responsibility. Somebody should fix them. Year after year, our audited reports show that our revenue income exceeds our expenditures, and yet we raised the levy the next year, and that excess that we had the year before disappears. And as an example, right now, the Q2 statement, which is a great one, by the way, we'll talk about that if we have time, shows that we have a $450,000 variance to the good at 6 months in, which says that we're $900,000 at the end of the year, which is the 8.5% that we're raising our levy. In other words, I can look at those numbers and say we don't have to raise our levy. Thank you.
Okay, staying on with the fiscal issues. Question 7 is, what are your positions on the school bond issue, pros and cons? And we'll start with Don.
Okay, I have no position on that. I don't think it's proper for a candidate for the city council to get involved on an issue specifically. I will make a comment that I have concerns if it does pass, that the intersection at 246 and Jefferson be a major consideration in whatever is done with the high school. I asked the council earlier about what their plans were and with the school, and the response was, well, we will not change the driveways. It'll be the same as it is now. And so there would be $7 million spent out there, and we would still have an accident that kills people. So it's up to the public to decide if they want to vote for it or not. But if they vote for it, it has to be done in a way that improves our whole situation out there from a traffic safety standpoint. We have to allow our kids to walk to school when they live within 4 or 5 blocks of the school. Thank you.
Thank you. John?
My biggest concern about the school bond is that the city council has a desire to raise the property tax levy 8.5% at the same time that this might go in. I've talked to somebody recently who said, my home is 50 years old. You don't see me tearing it down because it's unusable or unworkable. These schools are structurally sound. They just need a little tweaking. I think the school, I wish the voters, I'll be voting against it, and I think the voters should say this was a nice first shot, go back to the drawing board and make something else work, because they may be saying it's just 108 or 109 million. When you factor in 25 years of bond payments, we're approaching 175 million. This is a significant tax increase. And they're asking for a renewal of the operating levy at the same time. That's a lot of money, and it's going to cost economic development. It's going to cost affordable housing. I think we're already starting to see it reflected in the difference of gas prices locally.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
I do tend to agree with Don on this one. I wonder at the appropriateness of asking city council members what they think about the school bond issue. It is a community issue, but I'm running for city council, not the school board. Nonetheless, public education is critically important to the country. If you want to have an operating democracy, you've got to have a decent public education system. I do urge people to study the issues. There are two of them. One is the operating levy. The other is the bonding question on the buildings. It is a lot of money. It is. However, John has criticized again the proposed tax increase for the city. 6% of that is tied up in city employee pay increases. You can't keep good people if you don't pay them. We're not overpaying people in the city. But I just went out to the job fair. At the job fair, they can't find enough people to work for them. We're going to lose our people because sooner or later business is going to figure out they got to pay people more. We don't want to lose them. That's why we had to have the pay increases. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Question 8. What can the city do to support our young people, including DACA recipients? And we'll start with John.
That's a difficult one. I just think that question, the council is certainly, Northfield's always been a welcoming community. And taking a public stance and making Northfield a sanctuary city has always helped with that impression. But some of the things that the city could do are mostly, in my opinion, just feel-good measures. Definitely we're welcoming. Northfield's always been a welcoming community. I was born and raised here. I think the city is pretty much doing everything they can in that issue, and I think it's been a pretty good success for Northfield.
Okay, thank you. Don?
Okay, would you repeat the question? My question for your question is, it asks young people and DACA? Is it
Well,
separate?
the question includes them together. What can the city do to support our young people, including DACA recipients? So I think maybe
Okay.
they're looking at the complex diversity within the city
Okay,
and dealing with opportunities for the young people.
Okay, I'll take a cut at that. I think in terms of young people, I think the city has done and is doing an excellent job of getting young people involved in such programs as the Mayor's Council and the various youth organizations. I've seen many of them come to the council meetings and participate. And I think that is one thing that's happened. I think going back, I'm not real familiar with the current behavior of the Key, but I've watched a bunch of young people do an amazing job and finally convinced the city it was time to put in a skate park. As far as DACA, it is really tough. It is an emotional issue for me, and yet I don't know what we do other than supply whatever support we can for those people. And they are our citizens. I look in a dictionary, not the legal thing. They are the citizens of Northfield, and it's up to us to do what we can to protect them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Thank you. I'm a retired public defender. Did public defense work for almost 20, 25 years. Helping youth is essential. First of all, they've got to have educational opportunities. Public education is critical. Second, you got to fight illegal chemical use, which we're doing. Third, they have to be recognized. They have to be heard. The word heard does not mean the same thing as obey, and I know everybody understands that. But there are folks that have this idea that if they say something, the only way that they can be heard is if people react to it. What I've found in my experience is the vast majority of people need to be just heard and listened to. We're doing that with the Mayor's Youth Council, Mayor's Task Force on Youth, Alcohol, and Drugs. And the key, although it's not funded by the city, is a good thing to have. But as for DACA, man, That's a federal thing that the only way we can affect that is go out and vote for our congressman and for our U.S. senator, and 3 years from now for president. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please comment on the council's vote to turn back 4.3 acres of the Meadows Parkland and your opinion on the parklet. Where is Meadows Parkland, by the way?
It's in the southeast part of the city.
Oh,
as
okay,
far as
thank
I
you.
know.
I'm done.
Yeah, it's about 40 acres right on the southeast border of the city. It's open farmland at this point.
Okay, thank you. I just
Yeah,
wasn't
okay,
familiar with
yeah.
it. Thank you. Okay, we'll start with Greg.
I have got to have more information. If 4.3 acres was given back, it was given back for a reason. What was the reason? I don't know. Maybe we addressed it at the city council, but quite frankly, I can't remember. I'm sorry.
Okay, you can only answer what you know, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Don, are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am. And I think giving it back was way premature. We acquired the land as tax forfeiture. The whole, I'm rounding the number, I think it was 40 acres. And there's a desire to run a road through there and give back part of the land go to the state if we don't take it. The problem is there's no plan for the park. There's been much discussion amongst the council. The council has never gotten complete input from the Park and Rec Board, who should be in charge of it. So we don't know what kind of park we want. We don't know how it's going to be used. And yet we gave the land back, which is now irreversible, other than waiting and seeing what the plan was. We just got ahead of ourselves on that. And now we don't hear much at all about the park. And it's going to cost a lot of money and take a long time, and that's fine, but we need a plan. And I think the council made a plan that it has not been thought through.
Okay, John.
I confess I don't have a lot of information on it, but it sounds to me like the idea was premature. But it reminds me of probably my biggest criticism of the current council is that they often just react to what staff puts in front of them at that particular meeting. Some issues rise to the forefront. Some are, one issue kind of counselors, and then this thing gets on the back burner, and there's no real big picture thought that goes into some of these motions that they do. I once heard a counselor say they wish they had a slush fund of money that was there that's just in case a great idea pops into their lap, they'd be able to fund it. That's my problem with the counselors. They're not idea people. Bring your ideas to the counselor. You're a counselor, do something. Be proactive. Don't just react to what staff puts in front of you at that time.
Okay, thank you. We'll take on another one here. What is the key to a city council conducting its business efficiently and respectfully? And we will start with Don on that one.
I don't think there's any rules and process. I think it's 7 adults getting together and deciding on how they're going to work together to get a job done. I think in the last 2 administrations, we've witnessed 2 extremes. I think under Mayor Graham, who I know and respect, that we ended up with a lot of let's say, very contentious discussions and arguments that were viewed as probably negative. But we know what everybody was thinking. I think under the present administration, there seems to be a restraint on discussion. There are limits on even the counselors talking and how much time and what they can say. And I think we're getting civility at the expense of getting good discussions. Many decisions are made because the counselors have used up their time at the microphone and aren't able to carry on a back and forth discussion with their fellow counselors.
Okay, thank you. Greg?
Thank you very much. I practiced law for 33 years, so I may have a different perspective on this. From my perspective, based on my legal experience as well as the last year and my previous service on the city council, I think you need three things. I think you have to have fair rules regarding how city council meetings are conducted. Things that you can't say, but you've also got to have someone who enforces those rules fairly. Finally, you've got to have council members who are respectful towards one another. We have had a number of discussions, and I do disagree. I think the rules right now do allow pretty full and fair discussion. My frustration has been I can't say objection periodically. But I believe the mayor has enforced those rules fairly, and I think we're doing pretty well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John?
I've seen both extremes. I've served with mayors that have both extremes. The problem is that oftentimes, in my experience, someone wants the last word. And when someone on the opposite side of an issue says something, they make their case, they say why they're going to vote their way. Somebody who may have already had the chance to say their case but didn't like what that person says wants the last word, even though it's not going to change their mind. The last word goes to the mayor. That's the way Northfield, the meeting structure is set up. And a lot of the frustration comes with that inability to get that last word. And I don't necessarily think this council is as cordial, is more cordial than the last. It's just someone on the opposite side politically happens to be mayor running the show. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Along with city governance and operation, how do you feel the city is complying with the tenets of the charter? And are they following the guidelines as established? And I will start with Greg on that.
Oh, I wish you'd made me last.
I'm sorry.
I'm a member of the Charter Commission, and I have thrashed out this question at a couple of meetings. I do believe the city is following the charter. We are advised periodically by city staff and by our attorney when the charter does require us to do something. I think the question is really about whether we need to have some charter changes. I wrote some notes down, of course, now I can't find it. There they are. There's been a proposal that we change 3.8 of the charter. I would love to discuss that more fully. I have run out of time, but I do believe the city is following the charter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Don?
I have on my list, the charter is an important issue to me. And the note I wrote to myself is to say, why do we choose to ignore it? Mr. Colby is right that the city attorney says, yeah, you're okay. But I think it's up to the 7 people on the council to decide to read the charter and to follow it. And when they don't, it's up to somebody, and I believe it's the Charter Commission, to flag that they are not following it. You know, we've had several complaints. We've had 3 Charter Commission chairs come to the council with issues, politely and succinctly asking for gifts, and they have literally been insulted and chased out of the chamber almost. Tim Clack walked out that door because of the way he was treated. David Littersher was not allowed to come to the podium when everyone else was there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. John?
I'm also a member of the Charter Commission. I've been disappointed in some of the council's actions, clearly in their behavior towards fellow Charter Commission members. I think there's always been a little bit of a tug of war between the two bodies. And I think it goes with whoever happens to be there and their political ideas about things. I don't believe the council has violated the charter. Sometimes I think they bend the intent of the law a little bit. I don't know how we fix it. The charter is really loosey-goosey about a lot of things. I almost think the charter kind of complicates political life in Northfield, and maybe Northfield would be a lot simpler if we'd just become a statutory city. Things would be black and white. The city attorney would be able to look at state statutes and say, that's the way it is. The charter allows Northfield to be a little loose with it. Yeah, my time's up.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've reached a point where we've run out of time for additional questions, and I want to thank the audience for the questions. We've covered a fairly wide range of issues, and now we'll move on to having final comments from the candidates. And we'll have, again, 1 minute closing comments, and we'll begin with Don.
Okay, I have one item I didn't get to, and we have a major street project coming up next summer. A whole bunch of loose issues on that. All the businesses involved, which are a large number, are protesting the loss of parking. The businesses will lose business and be injured during this construction period, yet they will be the ones that will pay for it. So that it raises issues. The city still has to come up with a better way of setting the assessments for the repairs. They have to come up with a way to keep the parking. They have to come up with a way of scheduling the construction so that these businesses have minimum interference. With that, I'd just like to ask everybody to look into these issues, become familiar, and vote what they think will be best for Northfield.
Okay, thank you. Greg.
Thank you. Northfield has 4 or 5, maybe 6 major businesses. The number 1 or 2, well, in that top 5 are St. Olaf and Carleton. Neither one are suffering any significant student loss. They are vital economic engines for this community, as is Sheldall. I can't remember all the others, but we now have Post in the city. None of those businesses seem to be losing employees. They don't seem to be losing business. Northfield is in good shape. It will get into better shape. If you have doubts about our downtown, I urge you to go visit Albert Lee, go visit Austin. We can continue to do better by focusing on preserving our downtown, promoting tourism, and making our city a better connected with, connecting to the statewide trail for cycling and walking and pedestrians. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. John.
It's been brought up this 6% of the 8.5% proposed property tax levy is for employee salaries. When I was on the council, we budgeted within our means like a normal working class family would. We looked at our budget and said, what are our priorities? And that's where we put our resources. I don't like this council raising taxes because they want to pay their staff more when they give $35,000 to the NDDC. If the chamber doesn't get a similar payout, why are they getting a payout? They gave $1.5 million in tax considerations and other considerations to the hotel project for the promise of 5 FTE equivalent, full-time equivalent jobs. And when that project stalled, with the city being a major stakeholder in it, that project developer should have come to the council and given a statement as to why the things had stopped. I run out of time.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank John and Don and Greg for sharing their perspectives with us tonight. And we're happy to have your comments, and we're happy to have the participation of the audience. It makes for a very interesting evening. And we're really happy that we have had thoughtful questions and we've had a very respectful audience. That helps us achieve our goal. The League of Women Voters of Northfield and Cannon Falls is pleased to sponsor candidate forums as opportunities for civil discourse between candidates, among candidates, and with their constituents. And it also gives us an opportunity to inform the voters about the candidates. It is the responsibility for each and every qualified voter to be informed and to participate in the November 11th elections. And with that, I'm going to Kathleen has asked to have time for an announcement, and then we'll have the conclusion.
Thank you. Just two upcoming things. One, if you have, the school levy was brought up this evening. If you have not had a chance to get information on it, next Thursday, November 2nd, 7 o'clock at the Bridgewater Township Hall at 500 Railway Street in Dundas. There will be a presentation on the levy. And secondly, another issue that came up this evening was the issue of housing. And the local League of Women Voters is going to participate in a study of housing in our community during this year. And if you're interested in that, whether it's youth housing or affordable housing or housing for folks with mental health issues or any variation, senior housing, we're going to try to explore all of that in a study group this year. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sophie. Well done.
It went well, thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. Can I give all these